Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Liger-Garrido Hour. We're back. We're going to do a Q&A with the audience, answer questions from you guys, and interact with the audience a lot in this stream. It's our major plan. We've also got some videos we can react to, like there's a video of Margot Robbie talking about her support for unions. Ukraine recently claimed responsibility for some drone strikes that hit Moscow. We've got some other videos we can look at too. But yeah, I want to do a lot of audience interaction in this stream. So look forward to that after the intro. All right. First and foremost, I see people talking about our AI generated content. Who does your graphics? They're quite cool. Recently, Carlos has been editing a lot of the thumbnails. I generated the AI pictures through an app called Lenza because I figured it would be cool for the thumbnails to be in that AI art style. And glad to hear that you guys are liking them because I think they're cool. And the engagement with videos where we do thumbnails like that seems to be better off. So said someone saying I like Midwestern Marx's general aesthetic. We appreciate that. That's something we put work into. Thanks to our graphic designers. I don't know if they want to remain anonymous or not, but they're awesome. And yeah, we want to do a rework of our website soon too, because yeah, it's been a while since we did an aesthetic update. So yeah, that would be cool to do. Thank you so much, Ross, for the €10 super chat, starting the stream off good. Appreciate you. Thank you so much. Power! Exclamation point. I like it. I also liked your recent blog post, Ross, that mentioned some political analysis that I made. So yeah, cool. What's up, Carlos? How's it going today?
It's going very good. I started doing research again. I had taken a little research and writing hiatus for like the past month or so. I've just been reading a bunch of random philosophy books, which is what I kind of love doing. But I'm back on the research boat, and I'm extending some of my work that I had done on Du Bois, and I'm also doing a lot of editing for our publishing press. So it feels good to have immediate projects in front of me again. But how about you? How are you doing?
Good. My brain is on recovery mode from intaking so many high level ideas, in the words of Dave Rubin, while I
Mm.
was at Fargo coaching wrestling. It's really fun. I try and have like a student mindset with everything I do. So being able to coach the national tournament in wrestling was cool because you're surrounded by all these other great coaches and athletes. So learning from them was really cool. My brain is on recovery mode a little bit, but I'm excited to get back to streaming here. And if you guys have questions, we want to do a lot of chat interaction with this stream. So if you have questions for us or topics that you'd like us to discuss, put them in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can. Obviously, if you send a super chat, that's going to be boosted to the top or get us to notice it first. But yeah, I recently also before I headed out to Fargo, finished Capital Volume 2, which was really cool. I leveled up. I'm now a level 66 Marxist wizard, working on becoming level 99 like Carlos. Once I finished the Capital and the Grundrisse and then the collective works of Hegel. But Volume 2 is really good. If you read, and everyone says this after they read the second and third volume, but if you read Volume 1, you're not getting the full picture, right? There's a lot of important and practical questions about capitalism that are answered in Volume 2. There's a lot less call to action and a lot less political commentary, I guess, for lack of a better word. It's more just focusing on the circulation of capital. But like, some people know that I studied economics in college quite a bit, like bourgeois economics, to try and engage with the bourgeois sciences on their own merits or whatever. And a lot of the stuff that's in bourgeois economics and neoclassical economics that focuses on the market and focuses on the exchange of goods and what they call supply and demand, a lot of that is covered or analyzed or criticized in Capital Volume 2. Even though, neoclassical economics, this economics that kind of isolates and only focuses on the sphere of circulation, which is what Volume 2 is analyzing, mostly came after Marx because, classical economics, the school was kind of brought to its logical conclusion by Marx and by Capital. So then the bourgeoisie had to invent neoclassical economics. And I've written about this, but a lot of the assertions in neoclassical economics are addressed in Volume 2, and it's really interesting and worth reading. It gets really dry at parts because he's, proving things using equations and using math and using tables, and at a point you want to skip over a lot of that stuff, but don't. It's worth it. Take the time to understand it, and at least get to the conclusions and the major points that Marx is trying to make in every section, because it is important stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And I often compare it. I use the Godfather trilogy, which is like if you watch the first movie, yes, you'll understand a little bit of the Godfather, but it's really not until you watch the other two that you're able to fully understand the first one and then also fully understand the whole. And that's just a basic understanding you get when you're working within a dialectical framework, that the categories at the end presuppose the ones in the beginning. So in order to understand those, you need the beginning. But the categories in the beginning, they contain implicitly, they contain potentially the ones at the end, and those actually end up becoming explicit in the writing. And you come to understand the first categories better when you see what they unfold into, what they have implied that ends up becoming explicit afterwards. And when you go through, I'm sure this happened to you, as you're going through through volume 2, you're probably having a few moments where you're like, oh, I understand this category from volume 1 a little better now. And you'll get that as you go then through volume 3, and he's explicit about it. The first section of volume 3, he says, the various forms of capital as evolved in this book, and he means the whole collection, thus approach, he means the third volume, thus approach step by step the form which they assume on the surface of society, in the action of different capitals upon one another, in competition, and in the ordinary consciousness of the agents of production themselves. So that's like his point. The last volume, of course, deals with capitalist production as a whole. And the paradox is that once he gets to that, he goes from production, circulation, production as a whole. And when he gets to production as a whole, he says, now it's when things start to look as how they actually look on an everyday basis. When we're interacting, go to the market, we deal with the various prices that commodities have. We're not dealing with exchange value directly or whatever. So it's this sort of paradox that instead of dealing directly with imagined concrete in a form that's abstract, you have to ascend towards the concrete. And once you have the whole, you can return towards the immediacy and understand it with the profundity of the background that it presupposes. It's a shame he didn't get to, finish it, but it's also important to remember that we kind of have to update a lot of these things, and that's why Noah's upcoming pamphlet on reproletarianization and the death of the middle class is so incredibly important. I'm almost done editing it, but it's it's superb because it forces us to rethink a lot of the assumptions, not because he's plugging these into, out of the part of his body where the sun doesn't reach, but because he's obtaining them from a concrete study of like the real developments of the capitalist stage of imperialism. We do have to talk about AI and deindustrialization and the effects of full financialization, and the move towards rents and speculation as the primary form of obtaining profit. And like, we have to talk about what changes that creates in society and update the analysis of capital, because that's what Marx would have done. That's why Capital is an open project. He doesn't even finish the first volume. The volume that he was working on when he died was a third version of the German edition of the first volume. Um, so don't like it's so important to read this and to understand it. But the most important part to understand is not simply the conclusions that are drawn out for, the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, early 1880s, but the method that he approaches the study of capitalism as a moving, constantly developing social totality, because that is what allows us to say, okay, what do we have in front of us today? Let's not just try to copy and paste Marx's categories onto things. Let's try to actually analyze the world in its movement and its concrete development, which is what Marx would have done, and see what are the places where the analysis has to go beyond Marx. It has to go beyond Lenin, not because that's a break with them, but that's because what they would want us to do is precisely that. We break with them when we treat them dogmatically and only stick to their conclusions. Um, but yeah, don't get me going on about the capital. I'll sit here and talk for hours on end. But
No, it's good though. I mean, Marx had 9 volumes planned, originally, and if you read the Grundriss, which is kind of like the blueprint for capital, where he's laying out what he wants to do and why he wants to do it, you could say that's equally important to read as the 3 volumes. He says he basically wants to do 9, and then in addition to the 3 volumes, you also have theories of surplus value, which is sort of like a 4th volume. So yeah, like you said, an open-ended project, and there's a lot more to be done. And honestly, a good text to read. I know it originally wasn't intended to be a text, but the German Ideology
mhm.
is a good collection of Marx and Engels' writings that explains their method pretty clearly, and some of the implications of it. But yeah, we got another super chat here. Have y'all covered the Uruguayan Tupamaros? I have heard that's a Marxist-Leninist group in Uruguay, but I know next to nothing about it. So, I don't want to. Not much analysis I can give there, unfortunately. I appreciate you sending a $2 super chat though, so thank you. What knowledge do you have on the Tupamaros, Carlos? None.
Unfortunately, none. Yeah, we. I mean, my hope is that in 10 years from now, we'd be able to have at least a little bit of knowledge about everything. But um, we're both still young, and we're learning a ton just by continuing to stay alive and being forced into study new things. You just did a long, at least I think 3-4 week study of Laos, and that you built up some knowledge that you didn't have before. And I find myself doing the same thing in other areas. So this will be something that we can now study and come back in a later stream and talk a little bit about and teach folks about as well.
Definitely. Um, yeah, I don't have much info on Uruguay, but studying Laos has been awesome. Super underappreciated socialist state. So, let's see here. I have a current question. How does one learn about current and past history from an unbiased view? Well, I would say there is no such thing as a completely unbiased view. Everybody has their bias based on a lot of things like class position, based on your material conditions. So I would say the best thing to do is like read philosophy, think about how to think. I mean, which is a lot of what philosophy is. How do we look at the world? How do we understand the world? How do we know truth? And that's a lot of that's talked about in a book like the German Ideology, which I just mentioned. But that gets back at what Carlos was saying. Capital is an analysis of the capitalist mode of production, and specifically the capitalist mode of production as it existed in Marx's era, and at Marx's time. But he got to that by applying his method, which we refer to as dialectical materialism, to uh, the history of capitalism. Looking at its development, its motion, its growth. Um, so yeah, that's the best answer I can give to that. Read philosophy. Read Marx.
Yeah, it's really a sharpening of outlook, because um, we understand that almost intuitively when a picture is painted in as comprehensive and complex a form as possible, it's generally the one that allows us to understand things best. Like if we approach an understanding of our world today that takes into account the changes in political economy and ideological shifts, and the changes in all spheres of society, and present a picture of the whole to you, and one that is dynamic and that sees all the parts in their interconnection, and that is attuned to contradiction and doesn't just shy away from contradiction because of fear of incorrectness or whatever. That's a picture most people understand is the best for really understanding something as best as possible. With and in technical terms, what that would mean is really understanding the concretely. So I would say if you're going to study a current history or past history, take that approach with you. That's the dialectical materialist approach. The ascension to the concrete, trying to understand things from the perspective of like the social totality that they exist in, the contradictions that existed at the time, its interconnection to other forces, and the trajectory that it was in, and that does this from an understanding that it is our social conditions of existence that determines our consciousness. So that when you're studying a society and not just like a natural phenomenon, you'd want to look at how it is that what are the relations of production, like what's the technology that's being employed in the production of those things, how is that stratifying society into classes, are there further forms of stratification besides classes that appear as non-class stratifications but that are actually class stratifications. What ideas arise out of this? How are they connected to specific classes? And what's the trajectory of this? So those are all questions which I think one should always keep in mind when one approaches things. You don't want to foist these onto the world, but be open to them showing themselves to you.
Absolutely, that was a really good answer. Okay, so I read chapter 11 of Capital, and he talks about Lenin, but never answers the obvious question of how many jackets is 20 yards of Stalin worth. What the
Okay. I was like, what the fuck? Where are you going? Like, it's a joke. Okay, good. Because that's
Yeah,
kind of like the concern. They're like, Karl Marx founded the Soviet Union and he killed 30 million people. And I was like, what the fuck?
I was reading
Oh,
this and like thinking about it and couldn't wrap my head around it. I'm like, oh, he's kidding.
okay, good, good.
20 yards of Stalin. Yeah, that is an obvious question. Get back to us once you figure out the answer to that question, Jai. Um, Broadly, how to best build the Socialist Party in the USA? Great question. So I was talking to my buddy Kyle about this the other day, and he said something really great. When he was in the Dominican Republic talking to the communists there, they told him, what they always make fun of the American communists for and the Western communists for is for making a million different parties, right? And being like, this is going to be the true vanguard party of the revolution with the correct line. And, it's like 16 different guys just meeting in a basement, and then the party eventually falls apart or splits. So that's what they mock the Western left for. And what they wish the Western left would do, at least these specific comrades in the Dominican Republic, is just get a good group of dedicated people, a good group of dedicated communists or people who want to learn, and teach them Marxism. Teach them Marxism, teach them Marxism, teach them Marxism, study, 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 as Lenin said. and then send them to the workplaces or the countryside or wherever to talk to workers and recruit workers on the shop floor and to agitate politically and do propaganda and educate others. And it grows exponentially like that. You educate one person, they can educate another, and it spreads like that. But that is why Marxism and philosophy is our greatest weapon as the working class. And that's honestly what our institute tries to do. And there have been people who have asked, why don't you guys become a political party? And it's like, well, I don't see any use in that as of now. I don't see that as being our role in the class struggle at this point. I see our role as being an educational outlet who's doing Midwestern Marx University, who's doing the Midwestern Marx Publishing Press and putting out educational texts and engaging with other scholarly works and putting out our own scholarly works from a Marxist perspective, and of course doing the streams and even more basic outreach and political propaganda on TikTok. But we can do that effectively partially because we've taken the time to study Marxism really deeply. So the idea is, if we can train other people up, teach other people the same stuff, they can participate in the same way, or do the same types of things in their own unique ways. So yeah, study. The people who say like, encouraging others to read theory is privileged, or the people who are bad mouthing theory and calling theory or people who read theory a bunch of bookworms who don't do praxis. It's the most ridiculous, stupid thing I've ever heard. I'm sorry. And it's a stupid ass stereotype that the people who read theory don't do practice, because of course they do, right? If you're dedicated enough to socialism and learning Marxism to read these old books from the 1800s, and take the time to truly understand them, you're dedicated enough to do some organizing 99% of the time. And there's nothing that you can do to further the class struggle. There's nothing you can do that furthers the class struggle more than studying, in my opinion, especially at this point of the class struggle where we're at in the U.S., where we have a sort of infantile disorder among the communists. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, studying is so incredibly important, because it allows you um, to be free, and that's it's a problem that our party has faced in the past, and other parties around the world have faced, where there was a specific moment where our American pragmatism at play meant that we would kind of just follow whatever the Soviets told us about the U.S. And the policy we took for a very long time was just what Moscow said that we should take. And a lot of the times it was correct, but an effect of that was that we weren't able to properly see what elements of our organic American Marxist thinking, whether it's Du Bois, some Debs, MLK, not Marxist, but has some kernels that we could use, Winston, etc. What kernels of that can we use to develop our own form of analysis of our condition, American Marxism, or whatever you want to call it? And we were never able to like systematically develop our own thinking about our own specific situation, our history of racism, of dealing with the color line, of dealing with the developments of the middle class, now with the developments of the death of the middle class. Like all of this requires applying Marxism to our unique situation in our history. And if we had a party that effectively was just kind of listening to what the Soviets said, we weren't able to fully do that. So learning Marxism, learning the theory is fundamental so that you can be free and self-determining and take up the task of understanding the world on your own and not just listen to what other people are saying. And that's something that we've said in the past. Like, it would be really cool if instead of just people like listening to our political analysis, they had the method to come to the conclusions that we would come about on their own. That would be like our ideal, which is almost like self-abolitional. Like, but yeah, I think that there is, however, a problem, and you specifically find it with the academics, where it's just theory for the sake of theory. It's just writing for the sake of publishing and for the sake of how those publications and the impact factors of journals help you in the hamster wheel of tenure track and getting better positions. And it's not these people's fault necessarily. That's what the system that they're in pushes them to do. They're always free to say, to give a big old middle finger to that. That's what I think I'm doing in my work, trying to balance a little bit of both, writing both for the academy, but doing 99% of my work outside of it, and trying to create counter hegemonic socialist institutions that have the scientific rigor that the bourgeois ones have, but without all of their bullshit, unnecessary bullshit. Um, but the most important thing I think today is getting to the people. There's a lot of arrogance in the people that do read, and they approach the masses in a very one-sided form. Like, here's what you have to think, here's why you should think it, and if you don't think it, you're a piece of shit. Um, and that couldn't be any more wrong and one-sided. I remember that Marx said that the educator must themselves be educated. And he said that in a specific context, but I think we can reapply it to the relationship that the vanguard or the intellectual elite in a revolution should have with the masses. We got to learn from the masses. We got to be embedded in them. We have to understand why in our case, one specific candidate made sense to them and why another made sense or why another didn't. Um, so that's another thing that I think the left hasn't really done a good job on. And if it has, it's been very insular in the task that it's done, which is understanding the masses. That's something that any socialist party that's going to be successful is going to have to do. It's going to have to be, if it's not from the masses, it's going to have to at least have its interest deeply at heart. And what I mean by from the masses, I mean like people that are specifically like Noah, organic intellectuals that are just a regular working class carpenter that's also brilliant and capable of doing amazing Marxist theoretical work. So you have to be with the people. So it's a crisis of theory, but it's also a crisis of, because it's a crisis of theory, it's also a crisis of praxis. And because it's a crisis of praxis, it's also a crisis of theory. You can't have good theory if you're disconnected from the masses, and if you don't have good theory, you can't get to the masses.
I'm gonna start giving you dings every time you say something good. Like, what's that sports show, Around the Horn, where they all make argument? Dude, we should actually do this sometime. Is like, we should structure our show this way, but they have to talk about certain topics and they all make arguments, and somebody gives them points based on how good their arguments are. That's what I'm
I
gonna
know
start
that
doing.
Noah, when I did the teaching for his class, I watched it afterwards, and every time I guess he felt like I made a good point, he popped into the screen and just went like this with the pen and then popped right out.
It's freaking hilarious. Um, all right, we got Moscow metro system is how civilized people live. Yeah, I've heard it's really, really nice. I'm actually hoping to get the opportunity to visit Russia and the Donbass soon. More info on that to come, hopefully. But yeah, I've heard the subway system's really nice, inexpensive, and man, public transportation is such an obvious investment that we could have under socialism. I was recently talking to a person from Ukraine, not a socialist or not a political person at all, really, but they were telling me like there's so many trains and methods of public transportation in Ukraine compared to the US. He's like, it's all left over from the Soviet Union. He didn't even realize that was a political statement to make for him in Ukraine. It's just obvious. Like, yeah, there's all this leftover infrastructure, public infrastructure from the Soviet Union that's pretty great and that the people appreciate a lot. So yeah, saying that that's how civilized people live. I mean, that's a good way to put it, honestly. Like it's what a more advanced, a more forward thinking progressive society would have. But it's weird, like in the US, they've created this framework to where we don't even think about, being progressive as like investing in the productive forces or investing in public
Mm.
infrastructure or investing in material things that improve people's lives. Being progressive is always portrayed through the framework of identity politics and embracing Western cultural values. Um, that's what's considered an advanced civilization. And that ideology lends itself to imperialism, obviously, which we've assessed pretty thoroughly. But Yeah, you got anything to say about the Moscow metro system?
Yeah, it's from the pictures and videos I've seen, it's incredibly superior to what
Yeah.
little bit of it that we do have. But I saw a picture recently of a Chinese. It was the first high speed rail train station in China, and this thing was just fucking beautiful compared to anything in the U.S. It looks like it's from a civilization in the future, and they were, I think, abandoning it because it was too backwards. Like, the things in China that are being abandoned are like things that seem like they're 3 centuries ahead of like the US. It's kind of like a rich family that's just throwing away Gucci clothes because they wore it one time. And we're here with like hand me downs or something. Like, oh my God, how are you doing that? But yeah, it's that shows you how capitalism becomes a fetter on the development of humanity, on the development of the productive forces. And since the 70s, capital, in order to achieve a level of profit, a rate of profit that it's happy with, it's turned towards speculation and speculation. And so it doesn't produce anything, it's just purely parasitical. And again, Noah's book is going to do an excellent job at explaining that and how that changes the class struggle in the US and the potential that it gives us for revolutionary struggle.
Absolutely. I'm excited for people to read that. Similar to how I was excited for people to read this, The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism, still available on MidwesternMarks.com, still available to $10 Midwestern Marks patrons, and still available to YouTube members above $10 on our community page. So really encourage people to read that as well. Just figured you bringing up Noah's upcoming book was a good time to shout out the publishing press and our other works, which are all available. Some of them very cheap. Like if you want to know more about China and the revolution in China and how the reform and opening up period where China allowed more private capital and more markets into their country. If you want to hear an argument for how that was not a restoration of capitalism, but rather a deepening of the revolution and of socialism in China, read Carlos Martinez's No Great Wall, which is literally like $4 ebook, and that's one of
Yeah.
the main questions that we're asked about China. And we've done a lot of explanations and analysis on that, but um, you know, uh, in book form, in written form, or Carlos Martinez, that book by him is a really good way to get that information in written form and in a systematical manner.
And we
Systematic.
will be
That's
doing
not a
just
fucking
real
word.
quick on that.
Wait, hold on. Is systematical a word? No, systematic.
Oh, I don't know if it's a word or not. It
I'm
sounds
an
like it
idiot.
could be. Well,
Go
you
ahead.
could just toss it to me, and if I make it, since I have the philosophy degree, we're allowed to make words and neologisms and all that shit. So I
True.
can make it a word for you and then hand it back, and
It's a
it's
Garridoist
officially a word.
expression. It's a
Right.
Garridoist philosophical expression to be systematical.
Instead of like Heidegger just making a bunch of weird neologisms, whatever words that we make up because we don't know what the correct word would be, just dish it off to me. I use it and then I pass it back and it's officially a word.
Perfect.
But we're doing, so that was a really good short pamphlet on China. But if you're interested, Carlos Martinez also has a larger book that he just came out with, and we're going to
Oh,
be hosting the book launch for that as well. And so the East is still red. Um, Chinese socialism in the 21st century. We're going to be co-hosting the launch for that with the International Manifesto Group, with the Friends of Socialist China, and with the Critical Theory Workshop sometime in August. I know we have a concrete date, but I can't remember what the date is. So look out for that in August. And for more collaborative projects of this sort, I know we have one coming up talking about the PMC, one talking about fascism, one talking about radicalized capitalism, coronavirus, and war. So a lot more collaborations on that front, at least one a month, hopefully.
yes, can't wait for that. Um, All right, another super chat question. Thank you all so much for the super chats. And again, we're doing, we'll maybe do some reactions and stuff today, or some news and politics, but we're doing heavy audience interaction today, answering your questions, talking about topics that you guys want to talk about. And obviously, super chats get jetted to the top. Those are the first ones that we see. So if you want a question or topic to get discussed, for sure, just send it in the super chat and we'll get to that. If not, we'll try and get to it still, but no promises, just because we have limited time and resources. And yeah. But anyways, propaganda that Stalin is shorter than Napoleon. All right, based on the 2 minutes of research I've done since I read your chat 2 minutes ago, I think it is propaganda, because they say, there's this idea in the West of the Napoleon complex, little man complex, which, I do know a lot of really short people through wrestling who love to start fights, who do have like little man syndrome. It is a real thing, a real psychological phenomena. Everybody probably knows someone with little man syndrome. So it makes sense that the West would try and portray their enemies, their enemy like Stalin, as this little man, as this person with a Napoleon complex. Supposedly they say Stalin is 5'4" and Napoleon is 5'6". But, however, my friends, here, let me pull it up, is a picture of Stalin next to Truman, who supposedly is 5'8".
Oh,
And if you look here, it doesn't look like Stalin is 4 inches shorter than Truman, unless our man is standing on stilts. So, is this just Western propaganda that Stalin is 5'4"? I don't know. Maybe he was. But, they've also said a lot of crap and a lot of lies about Stalin, and this might just be another one. Like, some of the lies that they've told about Stalin are so stupid, too, and so, like, petty. So I would not put it past them for sure. But yeah, I haven't done extensive research on this topic, but I wish we had Grover Fur on. Go into the Soviet archives and find Stalin's height for us, Grover Fur.
oh man. You
Or
know
Lady
what's funny?
Zahar. Should I text her and ask her about this? I'm sure she would.
Noah is from the same part of, I believe, Georgia as Stalin. And I think he might be in the mid fives as well. So um, Georgia produces a lot of short kings. We'll put it that way. But short king. Oh, there you go. AJ said it.
Yep.
Good.
That was actually one of the things in Khrushchev's secret speech. He was like, Stalin said that he was 6 foot, but he's actually 5'2". It was just one of the many things that he lied about. All nations are made up myths. Why not a global government? Well, I don't even know how a global government would be structured. But in the Marxist tradition, in the Marxist view of things, nations are not, in fact, made up myths. And Carlos, you can comment on this, or if I get anything wrong, please feel free to let me know. But if you read Marxism and the National Question, or if you look at the diagram that Domenico Lacerdo made that we've showed many times, which shows that it's a tree diagram, and the trunk of the tree is socialism, but the roots of the tree is national self-determination. And the idea that if a people can't, if a people are colonized, if they're taken over by a foreign nation, if they don't have their own right to self-determination, there's no way to construct socialism. And socialism has unique characteristics based on the nation that it materializes in, or that it comes out or grows out of. So nations have their basis in material factors. Nations have their basis in a lot of things, but in the development of societies, groups of people come together and form a state for protection and for governing society itself, and managing things like the division of labor and whatnot. And in Marxism, that state is a reflection of the advancement of production. And yeah, I don't know if I'm explaining this as well as Carlos probably could, so I'll pass it over. But nations are more than just made up myths. They have their basis in material reality.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And of the Marxist tradition, perhaps the one that has written the most extensively on this has been Stalin. He's got really good work thinking through what constitutes a nation from a historical materialist, Marxist perspective. And he would agree with the formulation that Radhika Desai makes, I think, quite concisely, which is that there is a materiality to what we consider nationhood. So I plugged in the chat an article from her. Let me see. On the materiality of nations and its important, the importance of understanding it in our analysis of geopolitical economy and of the world today. We have to always try to avoid this sort of rootless cosmopolitanism, um, which is sometimes a reaction to the forms of extreme chauvinistic nationalism that we find and that we should, of course, oppose. But we don't oppose it by going to the extreme of rejecting nationhood and embodying a rootless, uh, almost bourgeois cosmopolitanism. We overcome it by affirming the materiality of nations, the process through which nations develop and a people become a people, which is a topic that, it's a central point of study for NOAA and a part of our um, institute's formulation of an American Marxism, and the way that that process doesn't negate the common humanity that we all have and the common experience that working people in different nations have with each other by the mere fact that we're working people. The opposite of of internationalism is not this form of internationalist understanding of nationhood or this form of non-chauvinistic nationalism. The opposite of internationalism, one could even say, is this form of rootless cosmopolitanism that feeds into and plays dialectically with a form of chauvinistic nationalism. So reject both extremes and just affirm common humanity and the fact that nations are real. They're real because we have made them real through our social relations.
Absolutely. I wrote about that too in nationalism and that piece that I did about patriotism like 2, 3 years ago. And a lot of stuff I wrote years ago makes me cringe, you know. But that one I went back and read the other day. It's actually quite good, in my opinion. Basically, saying what Carlos says is find that dialectical middle ground between affirming nations and, anti-colonial struggles or nationalist anti-colonial struggles. While also rejecting ultranationalism and BS like the Right Sector and Azov Battalion in Ukraine, these extremist, violent nationalist groups that resemble the Nazis in many ways. But here's Domenico Lacerdo's graph, which I used to explain Korea's right to self-determination to Vosh before he dabbed on the death of millions of Korean people, which was interesting. But this is from Dominic. No. Maybe this is from Roland Bohr
Roland
actually.
Bohr, yeah.
Um, Dang,
It's
I've been telling
inspired by
people.
Lacerdo, but
Okay, I've been telling people that this is Lacerdo forever, but Lacerdo's at least mentioned in the piece, so whatever. I haven't
that's
read
the
that.
I think that's the article in International Critical Thought that it's called um, the difference between um, the Western and the Chinese approach to human rights, or the Marxist approach to human rights.
Hmm. Either way, it's really good. I read it on the way to the Olympic trials for wrestling, or the world trials for wrestling on the plane. But Roland Bohr and Lacerdo honestly have a good way of simplifying a lot of extremely complex topics, and explaining why it makes sense for Western Marxists to support China and or countries like Korea, um, when a lot of times in the West you just get called a tanky, a crazy tanky for taking these positions. Lacerdo and Roland Bohr, lay it out in a very simple and easy to understand way. That anybody could read and acknowledge it's rational. So this is one example here. They have the Western liberal tradition. You see the roots of a Western, or not just Western, but a liberal capitalist society are individual mastery of private property, right? And that's protected by the law that's written into the constitution of liberal societies. The state protects the bourgeois class's right to private property. Then you have civil and political rights. The state is supposed to protect freedom of speech, freedom of expression. It often doesn't, because the right to private property comes first, or the interests of those who own private property often go against having free speech and freedom of debate. But that's what the Western liberal tradition says that its ideals are. And then what grows out of that is identity politics, and this hyper focus in Western societies on identity politics and freedom of the individual. And then you can contrast that to the Hegelian Marxist or Chinese tradition. And the roots of that tree are sovereignty, anti-colonial sovereignty. So the right of people to have self-determination. So this is national sovereignty. And this is kind of what I mean by nations having a material basis. They have a basis in the people and their economic conditions. And when countries in Africa and Latin America were struggling against their colonial occupiers, that was a national struggle. That was a struggle for national self-determination. The idea wasn't, we'll have one big global government. The idea was, no, we'll have our own government, that protects our own right to economic well-being, which is the trunk of the tree, which is what can grow out of sovereignty and political democracy. And then, out of that, you can have civil, political, cultural, and environmental rights that are protected, which if you look at China, perfect example, like in the Xinjiang region, you have the Uyghur autonomous zones, where their cultural rights are protected. One of the most mosque-dense areas in the world, even though in the West we're told that China is persecuting people for religious freedom. And China's making all these advancements in green technology and what we could call eco-socialism, protecting the environment. So you see all the ways that they protect political and cultural rights, and people in China have much more control over their government than we do, which might sound crazy to people who are brainwashed by Western media propaganda. But if you look at the structure of China's government versus ours, and the control of money in our government versus China, who just had these massive anti-corruption efforts, it's not even close. Their people have far more control of the politics. So yeah. Sorry to go on a rant, but I freaking love this diagram. It's such a useful explanatory tool for comparing and contrasting a Marxist country, or even a Hegelian country, I guess, like China, versus the Western liberal capitalist countries.
In the meantime, I put the link to Stalin's on the national question, and also put the title of that, where the essay where the diagram is from, which is The Concrete Conditions of Human Rights, Western and Chinese Approaches. And it's from Roland Bohr, and it was published in International Critical Thought. So I definitely would recommend everyone to go check that out, as well as the rest of Roland Bohr's work. We're going to have him on sometime in August also to talk, hopefully a series of interviews, because there's so many different parts of his oeuvre that I'm, definitely a follower of him in. So he's a tremendous scholar on Marxism and religion, on the early Marx and his relationship to the young Hegelians, on Engels and the theory of socialist governance, on Chinese socialism, on Western Marxism. Now he's produced tremendous essays criticizing Western Marxism, and he's teaching it at his university. So, I don't think all of that can fit in one interview. So I'm hoping that we can have a few interviews with him and cover the topics that he's been writing on for decades. The man is a machine. Like, he cranks out articles left and right, and book left and right, and he's a wonderful, wonderful scholar, and the archetype of what a communist philosopher and theorist should be.
Absolutely, as are you. Just want to throw that out there. But we've both been inspired greatly by Roland Bohr, so really excited about that. Yeah, I also just added Ken Hammond on Facebook, so I hope he adds me back. Me and Carlos have just been like adding all these philosophers that we see on Facebook or any thinkers we like add friend. I even have like people who don't necessarily like us on Facebook. And I've also been doing it with wrestlers recently. I'm like, screw it, I'll just add them as friends. Like all these
Facebook
old
is like Facebook has the potential of being like a Tinder for academics. Some of the best relationships I've uh, I've gotten in with fellow academics has been thanks to Facebook, and it doesn't matter how high and mighty people are, um, they usually tend to reply to folks on Facebook, and yeah, I've established some great relationships with folks like that. I think I have Hammond on there too. Um, he's such a beast, man. He knows so much about
Yes.
China and Chinese history, and I think I found out about the show. Um, damn, I'm forgetting what the show is called, but it was a wonderful Chinese show. It's on YouTube with
A
English
succulent
subtitles.
Chinese meal. Sorry.
A succulent Chinese meal. Uh, I can't remember what it is, but it's on the period of New Culture, which precedes the founding of the Communist Party, and then it rolls into like the founding of the Communist Party. But he had posted it on Facebook, and I was like, oh shit, let me start watching this, and me and my wife just uh, watched it pretty religiously. It was a great show, and learned a lot about the pre founding of the Communist Party, China.
That's awesome. There's a lot. Yeah, Facebook's a useful tool if you use it right. Some of my best friends, are people who I mostly interact with through a Facebook group chat. And like we've maintained that since we were like a sophomores in high school. We're still friends and still have a group chat. It's hopped over to Snapchat and other platforms over the years, but social media is a blessing and a curse. I made a video a while back. I didn't post it on the Midwestern Marks TikTok. I posted it on my personal TikTok because it was more of an opinion than anything. But I'm like, I like China's policy where they are limiting online gaming for kids to like 3 hours. Like a policy limiting social media would allow people to get more value out of social media too. And then instead of doom scrolling and watching, unlimited memes and videos, which can be fun sometimes, but probably isn't the best for you. Could be replaced with just seeing what your friends are up to and social interactions. So, but either way, I don't know. You can also just have that self-discipline and not let yourself doom scroll through TikTok for hours, unless you're watching our videos, of course, then that's okay. Then you're getting smarter. Not based when China got rid of the Iron Rice Bowl. I don't know what specifically you're referring to in terms of the Iron Rice Bowl, but Vijay Prashad and the Tricontinental Institute wrote an article a while back about how like the rice bowl it was called, and it was written by Vijay himself, the rice bowl of the Chinese people is held firmly in their hands. Basically saying, I think that the rice bowl hasn't necessarily been abandoned because China is still fully in control of food production and agricultural production in their country, whereas in the U.S. and even much of the global South now, agricultural production is being controlled more and more by Bill Gates and shareholders in Wall Street, so the typical offenders. But people who know nothing about agriculture, people who have never worked on a farm a day in their lives, but who own not just the farm land itself, but the machinery used in farming and the fertilizer used in farming. And I wrote an article a while back about Bill Gates' efforts in Africa, his charity, his philanthropy in Africa, which has really just been giving people grants to buy fertilizer from his fertilizer company. So he gets donations from people, which he then uses to boost his own interests in Africa. And boost his own profit and funnel into his pockets. And there was a summit held in Africa where all these agricultural experts came together and said he's, not only is he not helping us, not only has the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation hit zero of their goals that they set for trying to feed people, literally zero of their goals, but in fact, their fertilizer is poisoning the soil. And the programs that the Gates family are pushing are trapping the farmers in debt. So it did the opposite of what it was supposed to do. And Bill Gates didn't acknowledge that summit at all, that summit of African agricultural experts, because why would you listen to them about agriculture in Africa when you could listen to Bill Gates, you know? He instead of responding to that summit, he just did an interview with the Seattle Times where he said, yes, we know that we hit none of our goals, but the answer is more fertilizer and more donations. So, you know, more of the same, more of the things that these African agricultural experts were like, no, 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 stop doing. So yeah, if you not to go on, I guess I just went on a rant about agriculture in the U.S. But China's agricultural system is not neoliberal. You know, their system of feeding people and meeting people's needs and managing agricultural resources is very different from the U.S. You know, like the steel involved in manufacturing all of their tractors and agricultural equipment, by example, is pretty much all owned by the state. You know, all that heavy industry is pretty much controlled by the state, whereas in the U.S. it's controlled by people like Bill Gates. You know, and they're not making sure that everybody gets fed, especially globally, which is why we still have 2 million cases of starvation every single year, despite producing enough food to feed everyone. But in China, they don't have that. They don't have poverty at all. You know, their people are getting fed. So the rice bowl, so to speak, of China is still in the hands of their people.
I'd be interested in looking up, if I'm sure there is, but looking up writings on like the quality of food in China, because our food is filled with so much shit, especially the
Yeah.
stuff you pick up at the supermarket, preservatives and pesticides, and just so much stuff that you see these videos of people that travel to Europe, and they're like, in terms of diet, I'm eating like shit, but I'm losing weight. My gut feels better than ever, and it seems to be the stuff that's in the food that allows it to last so long. And I mean, I could see the benefits of having food not um, expire sooner, but I don't know. I'd have to look more into the sort of risk win loss analysis of how much do we actually get from that, and how bad does it affect our health when we eat all of that stuff. But
I mean,
I wonder what China's doing.
right. And like they did that study in the Soviet Union that said they're consuming as many calories as us, but healthier food. My buddy
Right.
has a funny story. He traveled to Germany and he got sick because his stomach was so used to eating preservatives and processed food. And he's
Oh.
like, but it didn't matter because I got free healthcare, um, which just shows how some of those European social democracies have luxuries that even in the U.S. we don't have in our neoliberal hellscape. But what else was I gonna say? That would be an interesting study. I tweeted the other day, like, um, studies have shown that like 50% of Americans are magnesium deficient because of how highly processed our diets are. And then you look up, okay, what does magnesium deficiency do? Oh, it makes you anxious and depressed and constipated and hate life. It's like, oh, wow, well, 50% of our country has that. This is how we're making food. Freaking awesome. You know, and if you take magnesium, you know, I'm not going to say it's a miracle drug or promise it'll fix all the problems in your life, but it makes you feel a lot better. You know, it makes you feel less anxious. It helps keep your bowels regulated, which is more important than you think. So yeah, if and rather than looking at a problem like that, you know, and trying to change the way that we produce and distribute food, that problem's just overlooked. And instead, they try and give you, you know, the most highly processed, highly addictive food possible because that's what leads to high profits. But it's okay because only like 50% of our country is obese. But my friend was saying that too. My buddy this weekend. He's going to the wrestling community is pretty great because you know a lot of them are conservative, but you get to a higher level of wrestling and you have people who are traveling overseas all the time, and that
Mm.
really eliminates a lot of ignorance and allows people to get different perspectives on the world. And this kid who's going to Estonia for college, which I'm, you know, congrats to him. It's going to be badass. He's like, when you're there, you don't get fat. You know, like you said, you can eat as much as you want. You don't get fat because the food is just healthier and you're just full and you have energy and you feel good. And it's like that's what food is supposed to be. It's just not created like that in the U.S.
Right. Yeah. I've been taking magnesium too. I'm taking it specifically for sleeping purposes. I lay down, and I
Yeah.
guess it's because I sleep. I read into the night onto whatever, whenever I feel like sleeping. I go to bed and my mind just keeps going. It's like it's writing a paper without me, and I can't sleep. So, and when it's not doing that, it's doing some other weird stuff, and just having an existential life or death struggle on the question of death and the relationship of sleep to death. So it's, yeah, I've been taking magnesium and what's that other thing? Um,
Uh,
melatonin and magnesium, and it's been tremendously helpful for some peaceful sleep.
yes, I recommend everybody take magnesium. Honestly, everybody should do it. I also recommend nootropics if you have trouble thinking and if you have trouble with brain fog. But I mean, to be honest with you, the best thing you can do if you have brain fog is cut back on your sugar. I
Mm.
know some people won't want to hear that, but it's true. Um, thoughts on Oppenheimer's commentary on McCarthyism? I know that he became like a martyr of the Red Scare, right? Because he was critical of the U.S. empire and military-industrial complex, or whatever, or at least them dropping the nuke on Japan. I don't know too much about it. I haven't seen the movie. Today, I listened to a couple movie reviews of Oppenheimer and Barbie, and I was like, okay, I kind of actually want to go see these movies because they're sorry, Sound of Freedom as well, because they're having a
Mm.
big impact on the culture. So
Yeah,
I think it's important to maybe it might be important to see what these movies are all about and see why people are so drawn to them or why they're so divisive.
we should
So
do it.
maybe I'll know more after the movie. What?
That should be like a institute homework. You, me, and Noah already saw Barbie. Um,
Yeah.
but you and me should go see Barbie, and then us three should go see Oppenheimer and Sound of Freedom, and maybe we could do a stream on each one of those, doing like a movie review stream. Um, yeah, I haven't studied much on Oppenheimer's life or his comments, and I haven't seen the movie yet, so I can't provide too many thoughts on that super chat. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Sound of Freedom seems interesting. Like, dude, the reason people are mad at that movie are so absurd. It's such a purity fetish thing. Like, one of the organization is heavily funded by Glenn Beck, right? The organization that rescues the kids who are being trafficked. And people are using that to say like it's a right-wing movie. Like, yeah, there could be problems there, conflicts of interest for sure, but like the fact that like if you're an organization stopping human traffickers and Glenn Beck's willing to give you $10,000, why would you not take it? Like it's so stupid. It's some people are saying like it's a right-wing movie. Like it's against human trafficking and sex trafficking. And if you research the story, the guy left the Department of Homeland Security and the US government, and because the bureaucracy was getting in the way, because the government didn't want to spend money on actually helping people. That's not what they use the Department of Homeland Security and the arms of the state for. They don't use it to get sex traffickers. They use it to enforce the interests of capital and make sure that the U.S. working class isn't thinking about rising up or whatever, or the Colombian working class or Honduran working class. So the guy had to start his own organization basically. So I was reading about it. It's pretty interesting. So yeah, super interesting week for movies.
And what does
And
that say about the left? Like,
right,
when a
right.
movie exposing child trafficking or trafficking, and they go like, it's bad or whatever because it's right wing or something. Like, what does that tell the people about you?
Right.
What, so it's these things that they did the same thing with. They do the same thing with Trump or Tucker, whatever it is. If someone that's bad says something that, if you were assessing it objectively, is good, then that makes it good thing that they're saying not worth supporting or whatever, because it's been infested and it's been taken of its purity, and that's just, it's so absurd. And that's the importance of the concept. It helps us not only see it like theoretically and the different forms that it takes in politics, but in stuff like this, which is like, if it's good, it's good. Who cares who's decided in order to feel good with themselves, what asshole of a person decided to give it money? You have to realize that these capitalists, they or these right wingers, they have to know somewhere deep down that they're pieces of shit. So, and the things that they invest in are pieces are shitty things. And if that's the case, then they have to try to clear their conscience somehow. And doing something that seems neutral, such as funding a project that's trying to expose sex trafficking, seems like one of those areas where they might help clean their own conscience by giving it money. I don't know. I
Right.
might be wrong.
And I know a lot of working class evangelical Christians too, and even some who might listen to an atrocious figure like Glenn Beck. And I see this movie as a positive and getting to them, and it's an issue that you could use to talk to them about socialism. Like, yeah, look at how, the elites, or however they describe the capitalist class, look at how they um sex traffic children, and when Jeffrey Epstein was brought up on charges, he was likely killed because he was going to reveal secrets about the Wall Street shareholders and capitalists um, trafficking children. Like, why is that not the focus of the left? Why is the left like, oh, this is a bad movie? Look, Glenn Beck supported it. Why are they, why are they saying that rather than, yeah, this is terrible. The ruling bourgeois class is trafficking children and silencing anybody who tries to talk about it. A lot of mainstream media outlets are ignoring the movie, and it's like just like you said, what does that say about you guys?
All you have to do is ask why. Like, why are there these elaborate structures to do this? Right? Why is the demand for uh, engaging sexually with children actualized through these structures? And what's the bottom line? It's profit. It's just because someone is profiting off of it. There's money in it, and that's why it gets done, and that's why it reduces human beings to chattel and to sexual objects of play and children, and it reduces everything. And from there, if you get people to accept that, you get them to question, at least in a very atrocious aspect, the profit motive. And it's very easy from there to say, well, why are we in this war? And why don't we have health care? And why do we get in hundreds of dollars of debt for wanting a higher education? And why this and why? And then pretty soon you're like, oh, everything that's tied to the profit motive kind of ends up being really shitty on human beings, precisely because the goal of the things that are being done is not to improve the lives of human beings, but to make profit for a small group of people. And we can do things differently. And societies
Right.
have done it differently, and they've done a lot better in those areas than us. So that's the inability of the left to see why is it that some people are liking this, and let's see what's rational in it, and on the basis of what's rational, that rational kernel, disconnect it from the worldview that it's currently in and reconnect it to a socialist class conscious worldview.
You could say, why wasn't there sex trafficking in the Soviet Union? Why did prostitution flow back over the border as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed?
Yep.
These are easy connections to draw.
Yep.
This sex trafficking has become a part of bourgeois culture. And the capitalist ruling class and, so-called conservatives have identified that, and they hate it because it's one of the most disgusting, heinous things imaginable to any sane, normal person. Um, so yeah, it's you got to find the kernel of truth in these things, not just look to cancel them for one thing that's wrong. Holy cow, we got a lot of super chats. Thank you so much, Will305X. Appreciate you so much. I absolutely love you guys, and I try to follow and support as much as I can. Thank you. I would appreciate a guide on surviving in Miami as a Cuban socialist from Carlos. That's hilarious. If anyone needs a guide on surviving in a small rural town in the Midwest as a socialist, I got you, but I'll pass this one over to Carlos because that's his area of expertise.
Oh man, honestly, I haven't spent that much. I started organizing when I was in high school in Miami, and it wasn't that bad because I was just like a Bernie cred or whatever at that point. But ever since I've been a Marxist Leninist and more active politically, most of my work has been in the Midwest. And when I go back to Miami, I meet up with other people there that are doing tremendous work. I have really good friends in Troika, some folks in the Miami DSA that are really really cool, and people involved in the Puentes de Amor protests that are done on a monthly basis to overthrow the criminal and unjustified and illegal blockade on Cuba. And honestly, I've from what I've been able to experience, the small bits of time that I'm there, it's kind of changing on its own, especially for the younger people. You have like the remnants of the middle class that are still very anti-communist. They got their DeSantis flags outside their house, their Trump flags. But the vast majority of like younger working class people, the sort of ambience that I hang out with when I'm back home and that I grew up around, working class Cuban people, Hispanic people, black people, a lot of them, their social consciousness is tremendously different from what it would have been 10 years ago. In part, Bernie is to thank for this. A lot of them, like myself, saw Bernie as someone who gave them answers to a lot of questions that they just couldn't make sense of in their life because they didn't have an analysis of like the role of, private interest and profit in things like healthcare or education or housing, whatever it might be. And he provided that sort of pathway. And um, in 2020, the vast majority of 18 to 35-year-olds in Miami voted for Bernie, right? So it's a changing atmosphere, and it's not without reason that it's the state is turning more explicitly to the crackdown of socialists. We've had socialist teachers and socialist contributors from Florida that have asked us to like put pseudonyms in their work because of how serious it is. And you have people like Rick Scott, um, who looks like a testicle. I'm sorry, he looks horrible. But this asshole saying like, if you're a socialist, don't even consider coming into the state of Florida. Um, that's that tells us something. Not just like there's this fascistic crackdown going on socialists, but it also tells you the situation is changing in one of the states that had like the hotbed for the most anti-communist forms of thinking ever, and it's changing not because of a fucking void. It's changing because the material conditions that people exist in are difficult, and it's forcing them naturally, organically, to question the existing order. And some of them are finding answers, others are falling into despair. But I think with time, more and more will come to see the answer in the interest of the working class taking power, especially if we're there to fight. So um, I'd say you have to be more discreet in Florida, especially because of the anti-communism. But it is possible, and that you should maybe adjust your tactics and how you talk. When you talk with younger people, maybe you could be a little looser with the term socialism and communism and stuff. When you talk to older people, maybe hold back on some of those terms and just focus on the points of agreement for a while, and then you can slip them here and there. But yeah, it's feel it out. Don't be the sort of person that walks around with like a Stalin poster or something, or Fidel. Regardless of how much I love Fidel, I wouldn't do that in Miami. So just be smart about it. They're looking out for you, and it's hard when you're like growing up. It's hard to think that we have to be tactical in life when it comes to politics. That's one of those things, especially if you're like a super honest person. You just want to say like, here's what I believe, and we should talk and we should be friends. But sometimes you have to be more tactical, and that's the approach I would give. Things are going to get worse before they get better, unfortunately. If they do get better, that's up to you guys and up to us in our struggle. But be tactical about it. Eddie, I think you're muted.
Tried to say like three things while you were going there, and I had myself muted. I was gonna say Jacob, our wonderful Twitch moderator, would have laughed at you calling Rick Scott a testicle. That's like his favorite insult. But yeah, maybe don't take the strategy of the Baltimore Maoists. If you're in Miami, I do not think this will work. I mean, if it will, like, go ahead. If you know better than me and you think this is a good strategy, but Don't you think so?
The unique of it, that's what we're Maoists. We make a critique of it in order to improve socialism. The next time it comes around and throws people like your ass into a labor camp.
I think that's a great way to get arrested in Miami. Throw people in a labor camp.
They would love that. That's what they want people to think socialism is. That's what the elite want people to think socialism is. They want them to see socialists and just see these sort of human embodiments of Reddit people, and that just want to throw everyone into a labor camp, and that they're just not normal. There's just something going on there that's not okay. So
It's not okay. It's really not. You're making socialism look bad, man.
yeah, just be with the people, man. It's not that hard. Like I was at the 4th of July rally, and I don't own a fucking flag. But if the community is doing something, I'm gonna show up and see like what are the people
Right.
like. And I went there. I talked to a bunch of people, got some food, drank some beer, chatted it up, and you get a feel for what the people are like, and that helps you understand them better. And if you're involved in a process of radically transforming their life for the better, you need to understand them. You need to understand their daily concerns, what mistakes might be in their outlook, how those arise, and you don't do that when you fucking tell someone just because they're not purely on board with your Maoist ideology. When you tell them you're gonna throw them in a labor camp,
It doesn't even make sense. Like, and this is like the Shining Path in Peru kind of did that too, like killing peasants who didn't buy into their ideology fully enough. Like in China, not everybody considers themselves a Marxist Leninist, right? Not everyone's super ideological. There are a lot of just working people who know that their material conditions are improving, while the Communist Party is in power and while they have this Marxist Leninist government. So they support it. So 90% of people support it. Yeah, there's the Communist Party is 100 million members. You have 100 million Marxist Leninists who are actually studying ideologically, but you're never going to have a fully ideologically consistent country. That just doesn't make any sense. And to say that you're going to throw people in a labor camp if they don't buy into your exact ideology is so insane, and is going to do nothing but alienate people from Marxism and socialism. Carlos, are you there? Maybe he probably went to the bathroom or something.
no, I had my computer was about to die. It wasn't
Oh.
plugged in enough, so I had to go do it. But yeah, just be with the people, and that means different things in different parts of the country. It's not a one shoe fits all approach. Being with the people and understanding the people, if you're in New York, is different than if you're in Wisconsin, or if you're in Miami, or if you're in California. But it's indispensable wherever you are to understand your communities, to be embedded in them, and from that standpoint, approach your political practice from that standpoint in a way that's rooted in the people. Oh, you're muted again.
Shit. I was going to say, at the end of the day, that's all socialism is, being rooted in the people. Like Lenin said, Marxism theory is the collective experience of the working class in all countries. It's the experience of the people in their struggle to sublate the current state of things, and create a government and a system actually controlled by the people, for the people. Why don't Palestinians vote for the PFLP? They are Marxist-Leninist, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. I don't know too much, honestly, about the internal politics. I've heard that the PLO has kind of capitulated and they're less revolutionary than they used to be. I don't know if the PFLP is an attempt to get back to their revolutionary Marxist-Leninist roots. I'm not positive. I'd have to ask some Palestinian friends, or maybe like James Ray. Is a friend of ours, used to be someone who we would, we still have some ideological disagreements, I guess, but it used to be someone who we'd like butt heads with all the time. But now we've collaborated quite a bit. And he's done a lot of work, honestly, studying Palestine, or even Alex Zambito, I should say, our editor. It's kind of his area of expertise. I could ask them, and I'm sure they'd be able to talk for hours about that. But unfortunately, similar with the Ugandan group you mentioned earlier, I cannot expound greatly on the internal politics there. But appreciate the super chat nonetheless, and this will be, as Carlos said, this will be something that we research eventually and are able to talk about eventually. Do you got anything on the PFLP, Carlos?
No, I do not. I just want to second what you were saying, but
That's just I'm the geopolitics guy. I'm freaking gotta get.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate. I think I said in a meeting we had earlier. Come to me with all Hegel and Marx questions, but legal stuff or whatever it might be, second grade advice. But for philosophy, I'm there with you. Will, I think this came in while we were answering his other question though. So I think we kind of already addressed that. But get in contact with comrades from Troika Collective. Comrade Libre ex Sankara is doing tremendous work down there, and he's got a bunch of other contacts with people in the Miami DSA and with a bunch of other folks. It's important to build community, man, to have a good, solid group of people that you can bounce ideas off of, that you can hang out, that you can go get some cafecito with and eat some pastelitos with, and that's what it's all about. And so yeah, if you can build community, reach out to groups that think like you're gonna feel a lot better. And in terms of navigating, I mean, if you feel unsafe using your real name or something, use a pseudonym. That's an opportunity that neither Eddie or I will ever have again. But if it's not too late, use a pseudonym when you do stuff. But I would like to tell you that the people in Miami aren't that bad, but that would be a lie, because I've seen them.
I should read some of the comments that Carlos's relatives has put on our videos.
Oh my
God.
Friends
from Miami.
It's so bad, and we get like death every time I do a video defending, and it could be something as simple as just like lift the blockade at least for the next 2 months while they recover from like these oil reserve tanks that blew up. They're like, oh, this fucking communist. Someone's got to kill him or something. It's so insane, and they're bad. Like you see these protests, these caravans that are done by Puente Jamul, and all they're asking is like, let's have, the literal name is a bridge of love. Let's remove this blockade and let's have a bridge of love. And it shouldn't be how it is, which is that, you got Cubans on both sides, and the ones in Miami are like the worst enemies of the ones over there, because they're the ones that are most fiercely upholding and defending the blockade. And such a moderate approach as that one. Like the people in the caravan, they get shit thrown at them, they get punched, they get screamed at, and the police just like stands there and lets all the gusanos, do whatever they want to the protesters. So, yeah, but I mean, things are changing with the young people, as I said. So, try to build community, and if you can't, or if you don't feel safe, try to use a pseudonym, or I don't know, be tactical about how you handle your political praxis.
Absolutely. I think that's good advice. I mean, there's always an element of danger involved in arguing for revolution or, sublating the current state of things anywhere, because the ruling class it's in their interest to silence you and shut you up. So,
right.
In Florida, it seems like the government is drifting towards fascism, and I know leftists in the West are often quick to jump to calling things fascism, but in Florida, with the recent statements from Rick Scott and like we said, our comrade Libre being arrested for just literally singing a song at the Capitol, just completely non-violently, it is drifting towards fascism in many ways. So just be careful and take precautions, like Carlos said. Philly cheesesteak, $10 super chat. Thank you so much. More than enough money to buy a Philly cheesesteak, actually. So we really, really appreciate that. Appreciate you giving that much money to our project. Do the movie reviews, absolutely. Maybe I'll even hit up my buddy Evan from the Left of the Projector podcast, or like Carlos said, you, me, and Noah could do it, and we could invite Evan on too, because he's well versed in movie reviews and talks about the cinematography of stuff and stuff that isn't really up my alley. So we were gonna do Come and See next, but maybe we'll look at Oppenheimer, Barbie, and Sound of Freedom and analyze these modern movies. I think that'd be like make a really good like stream event or premiere.
I started watching. Yeah, that we definitely got to do. I started watching They Clone Tyrone yesterday, and I started watching it late, so I fell asleep. But I want to finish watching it today. It looked really interesting, and it seemed like it had the beginnings of a really interesting social critique of capitalism, both from the profit-driven and surveillance standpoint, but also from the racist and racist stereotype standpoint as well. But I've been watching I'm a Virgo, Boots Riley's show. It's really, really good. Very explicitly communist. Like the characters are explicitly communist, and it's pretty awesome. Like they reference Foucault, and one of the communist characters is like, "Yeah, that sounds pretty, but it's bullshit. It's got no value in organizing." So, but it's really
love it. I love Boots Riley, dude. He's so freaking good. Because so many of those anti-capitalist films, they're anti-capitalist, but then they won't advocate for socialism.
Right.
Whereas Boots Riley always goes the extra step of advocating for socialism, and in his politics he defends existing socialism and revolutions of the past. So he's the freaking man. It's amazing how successful he's been in Hollywood, despite his politics and through his music. It's just through the incredible value and artistic merit in his work that he's been able to gain this stature in Hollywood.
He's done stuff with the party and with various parties, so like it's not just this dude that believes in this and that's it. Like he's been active, and yeah, it's he's brilliant. We need more people like him. The last movie he did, I'm forgetting what. Sorry to Bother You, right?
Yep.
That one, I think that's the one we were supposed to see right before for our little socialist club in undergrad, right before COVID hit. So we were never able to see it together, but it's a wonderful movie. And I remember that interview he did with Amy Goodman, where she's like anti-capitalist director, and he's like communist. And became a meme, but.
I love it. Yeah. I love it. What a beast. That's exactly what I'm talking about with why I love that man. Don't call me an anti-capitalist. Call me what I am, a communist.
Yeah.
Anti-capitalist is such a freaking empty term, too. One time, forgot about this the other day, or I remembered this the other day. There was a tweet a while back that said, like, where are all the pro-capitalist leftists? I feel like all the leftists nowadays think you have to be anti-capitalist to be on the left. Like, oh my God. It's the stupidest thing I've ever read. The most liberal thing I've ever read in my life.
Where are all the pro-Jewish Nazis? It's like all the Nazis that I see nowadays are anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic.
Right. Giving Nazis a bad name.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Sloth. That's a beautiful picture as well.
Sloth love chunk.
When you die, you just wake up from a deep sleep as another person, because we are all one consciousness experiencing itself as itself subjectively. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I'm a old school Epicurean materialist when it comes to death. You die and you go back to nothingness, and we're not pissed about the fact that we were in nothingness for eternity and then came to life Why should we be pissed that we're going back to nothingness once again? Or why should we fear that? But yeah, I don't know. Of course, I would be pissed, and I deal with existential issues when it comes to death. But yeah, we interestingly enough, we covered this in not the last class, but the one before that, in my Marxism and the History of Western Philosophy course for the Midwestern Marx University Marxism School. And we talked about Socrates' argument that fearing death is absurd, because if it's like an afterlife, then that's pretty cool. You go and you're able to go and talk to Stalin and Lenin and just meet a bunch of historical figures that you've been dying to, that you learn from. But if it's just nothing, then it's kind of like those times where we're sleeping and we're forced to wake up and we're like, shit, I would love to return to the nothingness of sleep. It's a great rest. So even if it's that sort of endless nothingness, that's still not that bad. It's kind of like a continued sleep, and there's times where we want to continue sleeping. So that's Socrates' argument for why we shouldn't fear death, at least in the Apology. There's different arguments in Phaedo, for instance, for why we should welcome death. It removes the uncomfortable shell of the body, which prevents knowledge and which stifles the mind's ability to recollect knowledge of the forms or whatever. So, but yeah, I don't know. We're fighting for life and continuing to live. I think
Human
it's
instinct.
a human instinct. That's exactly what I was going to use.
Right. Yeah, the survival instinct, which maybe I wonder if that's why we get existential crises or think about death, because our survival instinct kicks in. But I like that, and I do look at it. I was going to make a joke about how I believe in reincarnation, and I actually think that I'm the reincarnated version of Joseph Stalin. And, that's a little eclectic part of the Marxism that I believe in. It's a Marxism of reincarnation as revolutionaries. But I look at it the same way. And I also feel that helps you be more bold in your actions in your life. If you're not constantly fearing death and constantly I love my parents very much, but I'm always telling my mom she's way too scared of death. She's always watching these Dateline mystery shows about people getting kidnapped and killed, and she's just terrified for us all the time. And I'm like, oh, Mom, I'm gonna die eventually. Okay, hopefully, hopefully I don't die before you. That would be sad, but it might happen. But death is a part of life. Why fear it when you could, embrace it? You have to grapple with it. You have to think like, how can I accomplish something, or what do I want to spend my time doing, my limited time while I'm alive? Like, that's something you have to take into consideration. But just a hyper focus on and fear of death, I don't think is useful. And honestly, that's why religion's useful for a lot of people. It's just a way to deal with death and be like, well, I'm never going to die, so don't even have to worry about it. I'll go live in paradise with God.
Heidegger would call that a form of inauthenticity. We have to, for him, be able to face death for what it is, and what it is the impossibility of possibilities, the possibility of the impossibility of any further possibilities. It's the eternal closing of the openness of Dasein. But at the end of the day, it's that finitude that gives everything meaning. And, I agree here with Viktor Frankl that we're meaning-driven creatures, that we need meaning in our lives, in almost to the extent that we need food and water and shelter. We need meaning in our life, and that's something that capitalism deprives us of. But I think the fact that we're finite beings, that's not disconnected from meaning. That's the way through which we're able to achieve meaning. It's because of their fragility and the fact that they can go at any instance. It's the fact that, it's not guaranteed whether my wife loves me tomorrow, that allows me to make certain sacrifices and to do certain things and to constantly express love. Like, if things are guaranteed, you just take them for granted and, whatever, why do anything if I'm going to live forever? But it's the fact that we're finite, that we um, provide our projects with so much urgency and meaning, and it makes the fact that we'll get to a moment where life will be no longer is one of the central components why life itself is meaningful and valuable. That doesn't mean
Yes.
we should crave death, or not wish for, like if we're about to die, an extension of it, but we don't want to be eternal beings. That would remove any meaningfulness that exists in life.
True that. Your wife doesn't love you, by the way. She told me you're spending too much time with Midwestern marks, so she thinks you're gay. So sorry, sorry. She told me that the other day.
Oh man.
Capitalism is the innovation to develop child sex robots to address child sexual assault rather than create conditions in which trafficking is eliminated. Absolutely right. Just commodify the problem. That's
Mhm.
such a good way to think about it. And I've heard people propose that, and it's like, bleh, why not just completely eliminate the conditions for that to even exist? Yeah, it's so disgusting. Bourgeois culture has hit a point where it's just in a rut. And Che Guevara said this way back in the day too. But like if you look at, I always say, look at Cuba's culture and look at their society versus the kind of culture that's promoted by Epstein's Island, which is an island in the Caribbean not too far away from Cuba. That's what capitalism does with an island, turns it into a place for sex trafficking, whereas socialism, allows a civilization to flourish and brings people health care and doesn't have this sex trafficking problem. So, um, yeah, it's crazy, dude. The amount of pedophilia right now, like, it's just wild. I follow all these TikTok accounts where they bust people. They like pose as people online, and then show up at these guys' houses and confront them and call the cops, and like, dude, there's thousands of them. It's like, what the hell's freaking going on?
It's a sick
Broken
society
culture.
that
Yeah,
produces sick people. And yeah, and that's not to say that sickness wasn't around before. My wife's grandma got married when she was like 13 to a 28-year-old, and you're like, whoa, what the fuck is going
whoa,
on here? Um,
yikes!
but yeah, it's I think we're evolving in our consciousness of that being horrifically wrong,
Right.
but it's definitely still around, and there's no incentives in capitalism to really deal with it, unless the only incentive to deal with it is profit. So you get shit like the trafficking rings or whatever, or shows made where they're catching pedophiles instead of preventing it from
Right.
happening, um, or
Right.
dealing with people that have that in an appropriate way and clipping it at the root. You just commodify it into a
And,
nice show or whatever.
and that's one of the problems pointed out in Sound of Freedom. Like, and even that you could look at as a little bit of a commodification of it, but it also criticizes the Department of Homeland Security. It says like they have the resources to stop this, but they're not. It gets held up in the bureaucracy, which
Right.
is intended to focus the Department of Homeland Security on protecting capital rather than nipping these sex trafficking rings in the bud, like a socialist government would do. So, um, yes, most heterodox Marxists you would still consider Marxist. Is Marxism process philosophy? Are you moral realists? Have you read Red Star Over the Third World? Lots of questions there. Thank you so much, Noah, for the $5 super chat. Appreciate that. I have read Red Star Over the Third World multiple times. Great book. One of those books that's like not the most like intellectually rigorous book, that isn't like loaded to the brim with academic sources and things like that, but it's loaded to the brim with like poetry and like beautiful stories and stories about Zapatistas who consider themselves anarchists. But they were inspired by the Bolsheviks. They saw the Bolsheviks and the working class uprising, and they learned from that and became more scientific in their outlook because they were influenced by the Bolsheviks in Russia. And it really tries to create this spirit of global solidarity that I think is really awesome. So that's a great book. As for the other questions, that's all you, Carlos. Have fun.
I knew you were gonna do that. Yeah, so I mean, to ask the question of heterodox Marxism is simultaneously to assume that there's an orthodox Marxism, and unless you're understanding that from like Lukács's point of view, where orthodox Marxism really means you're aligning yourself with the Marxist method and not with a conclusion, where orthodox just means like you're a Marxist, a regular Marxist. Um, I don't know. I don't know what heterodox Marxism entails. Would it mean eclecticism, like people that like to mix their ideas with other non-Marxist thinkers? That I think it's very dangerous. What often ends up happening is that the substance of the Marxism ends up being lost. Um, Specifically, when what's mixed is the philosophy, the worldview. Like you can take statistics from like a really good bourgeois economic statistician, where like their books have like this guy, I'm forgetting his name now, but Thomas Piketty, like his books have good economic statistics, and you can reference them quite a bit. And but you're not taking up his like worldview, his philosophical assumptions. You're sustaining your Marxism, but just like citing this and that person who did so and so study. I don't think that's heterodoxy, but eclecticism is something that we should avoid. I love reading outside of the Marxist tradition. Most of my reading is outside of the Marxist tradition because I just love philosophy and I love reading random stuff. I don't incorporate it into my worldview. I try to think, well, what in this is compatible and stuff, or how can this be reinterpreted in a Marxist form? But I'm not like bringing random ideas that conflict with the essence of Marxism into my Marxist worldview. I think that leads to eclecticism, and it's very, very dangerous. It's what led to Western Marxism. That's what the Second International was doing. It was mixing Marxism with Neo-Kantianism, and it led to the dog shit that we have under the name of Western Marxism today. Um,
I mean, just
uh,
look at someone like Zizek, who's like, you have to mix Lacan and Freud and all these people with Marx, and also that's why you have to support the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia. It's like, what? The eclecticism leads him to all these terrible positions, or he uses it to justify all these horrific political positions.
right.
Yeah,
There's
sorry, I just wanted to
that.
interject that.
The psychoanalysis is one big eclecticism. Althusser felt for it, and a bunch of people felt for it. That's not to say that perhaps there's a way that you can make compatible psychoanalysis in one field of study in a way that doesn't clash with Marxism, but there you would be removing the essence of psychoanalysis in whatever form it's taken, whether the Freudian or the Lacanian variations. Um, so yeah, avoid that form of eclecticism that sometimes passes itself under the name pluralism. Um, and the other question is Marxism process philosophy? In a way, all dialectical philosophy is process philosophy that says that to really understand things, you have to understand them in their processes. If you pull a thing away from the environment in which it is procedurally engaged in its existence, you're not going to understand it. What you're going to understand is a corpse that you have artificially severed from its development and its interconnections. So, in that broader sense, yeah, Marxism is a process philosophy. Um, are you moral realists? So, I guess that what you mean by
Wait,
this
hold on.
question.
Can I say something about the process
Yes, yes,
philosophy
yes,
quick?
yes.
When I was studying healthcare administration, which is like a super bourgeoisified science, they constantly had us doing process analysis of things, and it was super like corporate. Like the whole point of the process analysis was to see where are we using too many resources, or where can we fire a worker, and save money, save costs while completing the same process. And completing the same product. But it was interesting how even though it was bourgeois, their analysis was almost dialectical in a way. Like what we were supposed to do was look at the process of producing healthcare, and cut back on costs and also implement new technologies as efficiently as possible. And the idea is that the process is always going to be changing, because there's always going to be new technological advancements or advancements in how to carry out a certain process. So even though it's bourgeois, it almost ends up being dialectical in a way. So that's just what came to mind when I thought of process philosophy. But looks like Carlos disappeared on us again.
No, I'm back. I'm back.
Okay.
And the last question is, are you moral realist? So by this, what he means is, do we consider there to be objectively moral, do we consider there to be objectively good or objectively bad things from the moral standpoint? Um, and I would say yes and no. Um, in terms of like we do think that there are things that are objectively good and objectively bad, but we don't take that approach and make it an abstract universal, such that what is morally good is something that is applicable to all of history. Moral goodness is conditioned by the conditions which produce the conundrum of the question of, is this morally good or not? So it's we would consider, and this is not an area that has particularly been developed in Marxism, because ethics is not. Um, I I haven't really read any good books on Marxist ethics or whatever, but we're trying to develop one in this class on the basis of like a communist virtue ethic. But I would say that the question of moral goodness is one that we're not anti-realist or subjectivist or relativist, but the objective morality that we would accept is one that has to be understood dialectically and as conditioned by the uh, time in which one is, and place in which one is speaking from.
Yeah, and I think the idea of developing a Marxist virtue ethic is interesting, and Che Guevara was doing that in a way too with some of
Right.
his work. Even though there are, Marx wasn't interested in moral philosophy really at all during his time, and it's not something that's written about a lot in the Marxist tradition. But I found a lot of value in Hans Georg Muller's work about morality and his critiques of Sam Harris, who basically says there is an objective morality, even divorced from like religious morality, but the Muller critiques that idea and then says, I believe he comes to the position that for him, rather than focus on morality, we should focus on human flourishing. What
Yeah.
leads to the most objective human flourishing in the meeting of humans' material needs and the providing of opportunities for humans to develop themselves and their artistic capacities or, their human potential. And I think that could be, really sort of like almost a Marxist ethic or a Marxist
Well, yeah.
form of morality where you're just like, human flourishing is what we're trying to achieve ultimately at the end of the day, which,
That's
you can
eudaimonia.
define human flourishing in various ways, and it's a constantly evolving definition, but that's Marxism.
Right, and that's eudaimonia. That's what the Greek called it. We translate it to happiness, but the problem is that we think of happiness in terms of states. But their form of happiness was, through the concept of eudaimonia, was tied to flourishing. Like you could say that you lived a happy life if after the end of your life you can reflect and be proud of what you've been able to accomplish, the virtues you've been able to develop, the type of person that you were. Are you proud at the end of your life of the type of person that you were? Did you flourish? All that stuff. And if you did, then you achieved happiness, and that is the moral. That is equivalent to moral goodness. Um, yeah, I saw. I think I know which video from Hans-Georg Müller you're talking about, and um, uh, yeah, he uses sometimes a Nietzschean framework to these critiques, which considers that the concept of moral goodness or moral evil is something that develops out of slave morality and that's rooted in ressentiment and a transvaluation of values that's based again on slave morality. And I think the project of looking at the historical evolution of morality, specifically in the West, which is what he's doing, and the genealogy of morals is a somewhat positive project. But the way that he goes about it, I think, is very incorrect. But yeah, that's what a communist. Like, what you said, Eddie, is perfectly in line with what I propose to be a communist virtue ethic, and we're going to try to develop that using Aristotle, Lenin, and Che Guevara, um, and a little bit of Marx and Engels from the German ideology. That passage where they're talking about fishing on one day and speaking later in the day, and all that sort of stuff. Being able to flourish as a human being, be as a complete human being as you possibly can.
The other day you said that was the dumbest shit Marx ever wrote.
It was to some extent. It was very dumb because I mean,
It's been taken out of context by so many people like Prager, you who are like, Marx thought, there'd be a utopia where you could fish every day and never work.
and here's my thing, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think that part of flourishing is being able to set limitations to the areas where you're trying to flourish in. Like, in terms of your physical capacities, you can be a really good wrestler. What is harder to do is to be simultaneously a really good baseball player and a really good basketball player and a really good football player. You know, there's
You need to
if you
specialize at a
can,
point.
you need to specialize, and part of developing virtue and flourishing is kind of picking the thing that you want to flourish in, and not just doing 30 million fucking things in a day like Marx suggested we do. um, at least in that passage, and people have taken it out of context, as you mentioned. But that's he was talking more so about leisure. Like, if I get bored of giving a speech to my wife, I can go ahead and go fish, and then go do something else afterwards. And I guess that's kind of fine. But
I'm gonna
I'm
go
not
fish.
pitching communism to people like that. I'm not saying, hey, do you want to fish, and then give a lecture to your wife? And
Honestly, though, there's a lot of people in the Midwest who, like, if you told them like communism, you get more time fishing, they'd be like, all right, I'm on board.
it's Luke Bryan communism.
Communism
Communism with
with Luke Bryan characteristics.
communism with hunting, fishing, and loving every day characteristics.
It's fucking hilarious. All right, moving on. Dude, we got so many super chats. This was wild. Thank you all so much for the super chats. We'll try and get to all of them. Jim's suggestions to train in wrestling. You got to do squats and deadlifts, and you can do hack squats, kettlebell swings. Actually, sorry, the best lifts for wrestling are squats, deadlifts, and pull-ups. I either do pretty much every other day. I do one of those, unless I'm really, really sore, because those just build strength. But unlike any other workout, pull-ups are such a functional workout. Builds your back strength, which is exactly what you're using the most in wrestling, other than your legs and your hips, which is where all your power comes from. And you want to be able to shoot that power up through your core. At least in Greco-Roman wrestling, which is what I do. You want to basically feel your feet driving into the earth, and you want to be able to drive up through your body. So doing deadlifts and squats where you're getting your core and your legs and your whole body involved are the best things you can do to build basic strength, and build a basic frame on your body, but also train for a sport like wrestling. Thank you, Crocs on my feet. What a great name. Swag is all I got to say to that. Just found this channel and noticed you're live. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oops, wrong button. Round of applause to you for the super chat and for finding our channel. Thank you very much.
I always wore just like the dollar store Crocs,
Mm-hmm.
and they would always break in like a month or two.
Yeah.
And my wife
Not all
went
Crocs are
out and-
created equal.
Not all Crocs. Yeah, my wife's mom ended up buying me like real Crocs for my birthday, and they've lasted months, and they're like in such great shape that it was worth it. And now I if I go out and I'm not going out somewhere where I should be dressed relatively nice, I'm usually wearing my Crocs.
They're nice, dude. I got cloud slides now. They're basically like flip flop Crocs, but you can just slide them on. I pretty
Oh,
much don't wear anything else. I coached in them all week this week. Um, that didn't feel great on my knees actually, but
what's funny? The other question that you were answering about legs, man. When I stopped doing sports, all of my lifting, I don't think I've ever done legs again. I just wear pants. Leg workouts are reduced to like my cardio, and that's it. My day is literally bicep, chest, back, tricep, repeat. That's no, no legs whatsoever.
I get sore from running, I guess, in the legs. Cardio can help work your legs a little bit too. I also just have naturally like huge legs from my genetics, mostly from my mom. Actually, she has giant freaking legs. So
Half man, half thumb.
yes, nobody wants some of this. I'll beat you up. Crocs on my feet with a $10 super chat. Holy cow! Thank you for the $10 super chat. These super chats you guys are giving us are vital to supporting our project, so I hope it's worth it. We'll have to do more Q&A sessions like this in the future because obviously people like it. We've got like 25 super chats. So we'll try and get to everybody's question here today. Appreciate that you guys are so interested. We've been going for 2 hours already, so I guess we'll have to cut off at some point. But yeah, thank you all so much, and we'll do more Q&A sessions in the future. But what are some of your favorite books about communism? I've read the Manifesto and Anti-Do-Ring. What should I read next? As far as the basics, I would say Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. Obviously, Capital Volume 1 is a good one to dive into, but if you don't feel like you're ready for that yet, Wage, Labor, and Capital, or Value, Price, and Profit are pamphlets that Marx was commissioned to make so that the ideas that are in Capital could be more easily explained to people for political purposes, for organizing purposes. So that's still really valuable today. Also, Lenin's State and Revolution and Lenin's Imperialism, we feel, are two of the most vital texts to understanding what needs to be done and the current state of things. So we have two full reading guides for those. I also really like Origins of the Family, Private Property, and the State, which we have a partial reading guide for, but you can check those out. There's also a summary there that would, summarize the book, even if you didn't read it yourself. So that's better than nothing. Obviously, recommend people read the text themselves, but you'll get a general sense of it if you watch our full breakdown. So you can find that in the playlist section of our YouTube channel. But yeah, Utopian and Scientific is one of my favorite. When I was first reading Marxism or getting into Marxism, I grappled with that book for like months, and just read it over and over and over again. It's funny now to think back and like think that Utopian and Scientific was such a confusing book for me at first, and now I just kind of zip through it and it's just fun, light reading. But it's a good book to tarry with, so to speak, to grapple with and, take the time to understand it and think about what Engels is saying and what argument he's making. But I guess it's not the most basic text. If you want the most basic text, it's probably Lenin's Three Sources and Three Components of Marxism. That gives you a basic framework of what Marxism is and what it's all about. So that's another great one. And then the CPUSA's Party Manual from like 1940 is a good one for practical organizing stuff.
Yeah, I think you're starting at the right place. Anti-Düring, Lenin famously called it the handbook of every class-conscious worker. And that's the pamphlet where Socialism and Utopian Scientific is taken from. It's taken from its theoretical section. I would say read Michael Parenti's Black Shirts and Reds. That's like the first one that I used to always give to people. The German ideology might be a little tough, but it's worth going through it. And I would say, if you're in the U.S. specifically, read Du Bois's Black Reconstruction. Yeah. It's very important to understand the specific forms that our class struggle has taken and the role of their color line, racism, the failure not the failure, but the counter-revolution that overthrew Reconstruction, how that then plays into the development of imperialism. And he was never able to do what he wanted to do, which was trace out from the counter-revolution of 1876 to the era of modern imperialism in a scientific study, kind of like he did with Black Reconstruction. So he did it in the form of a novel. And the novel is the Black Flame trilogy. I've been able to get through the first two. I haven't read the last one. But they're pretty good in terms of novel-wise, but in terms of ideas, they're really good. So, and it kind of gets that extension of Black Reconstruction done somewhat well. So I'd say check those out. I really love
Souls of Black
Capital
folks
One.
are good too. Sorry.
Yeah, the Souls of Black
I've been
Folks
reading.
it's really good. This is the 120th anniversary, and I have a short essay that I'm considering whether or not to publish with the Institute, um, or to publish at all, really. But yeah, it's the 120 years since the Souls of Black Folk this year. That one's really, really good as well. But I like the Grandrisa. Um, I know it's technical and it's at some points jargony, but I like it because it's a good midpoint between Capital One and the manuscripts of 44. So there's a lot of mixture of the best of both worlds in there, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it just lays out the blueprint for Capital. Like Capital Volume 1 is such a great book, but if you read the Grundrisse, you'll get an idea of why Marx wrote Capital and what his plan for it was and why it took him so long to think about, the form of presentation for his argument or to do the research that he did to write Capital. It's kind of like taking a look behind the scenes, almost like
Yeah.
how it's made episode or something. So
The German ideology too. I don't know if we mentioned it, but that'll be
you
another.
did, yeah, you did.
Okay.
Carlos, please make your picture hang straight. I just noticed that all the comrades with OCD are freaking out about Carlos's tilted picture in the back there.
I think it's the camera, or it might not.
Is
be.
it?
It's stuck there. So.
Oh, it must be the camera. Sorry,
Yeah.
Michael, but thank you so much for the super chat. Appreciate it. Communists want to ban pit bulls. I don't know. I feel like people just need to be more responsible with their pit bull ownership, but some dogs are just bred to be more aggressive. Like dogs are descendants from wolves, dude. Especially my Cavalier King Charles Spaniel named Reggie. If you don't know, the Cavalier King Charles Spaniel is probably the farthest from a wolf that a dog can possibly get, actually. This is what he looks like. And it's funny to think that this is the same kind of animal as a pit bull. Because these things will just bark at you, and then if you walk up to them, they just lay on their back and give up right away. But yeah, I don't know. You got any strong feelings on pit bulls, Carlos?
It's whenever there's issues, I think it's usually related to the people that train them, not usually the animal. I just lost my first dog, which I didn't just lose him. It was earlier this year. But he was a pit bull, and he was as sweeter than any other dog you can have. I have 2 Chihuahuas, and they're assholes, both of them. Pieces of shit. Real horrible dogs. All they do is bark at everything. And they're very sweet when it comes to me and my wife and my immediate family, but they can't see another dog. And but the pit bull was such a sweetheart. So that's been my experience with the pit bulls. They're usually really nice and really playful.
Yeah, when I was in college, actually, my buddy got a pit bull. He made an impulsive buy and got it before he got deployed, which wasn't the smartest thing ever, but he was counting on his stupid roommates to take care of it, and they weren't really. So it wasn't even a dog that was being treated well. It was being left in its kennel like way too many hours a day. And I started taking it out every day with my girlfriend at the time, and eventually talked to my friend and was like, hey, your pit bull's being mistreated. Can we give it to her mom? And now our mom is raising it, and it's an amazing dog, though. Like even when it was being mistreated, it wouldn't have hurt a soul. It was
Right.
like nice.
Right.
it was like powerful. It looked like it was a dog that had been bench pressing and deadlifting every day or something. It was pure muscle, but it wouldn't attack anybody. So yeah. What do you think the anarchists get wrong about Marxism, Leninism? Just their childish view of the state. You know, they don't have, you know, an analysis of things that's based in historical developments, and based in, you know, what's real. It's or what's material. It's based in idealism. It's based in this idea that we can create a utopian society where there's no government, there's no state. You know, there's no need to protect the revolution from imperialism. There's no need to protect the revolution from counter-revolution, you know, or there's no need to even organize production. There's that famous, like, Twitter interaction between anarchists that's been memed and made fun of, where they're talking about who would produce glasses, you know, for people who can't see. And they're just like, just someone who would, you know, anyone who would like to produce glasses for fun, because it's fun for them to produce glasses. Like, no, you know, you can't just take away all organization in society, and all organization of production and expect everything to work out fine. You know, production and distribution, there needs to be management, and that management needs to be carried out by a party and by a state. And, you know, it's just this really utopian view. And it leads to also siding with imperialism oftentimes over existing socialism, because they look at existing socialist countries and like, oh, there's a government there, that means it's bad. It's like, well, you know, China's abolished poverty for their people, and that would have been impossible without the state. So are you going to look at that as a bad thing? You know, no, China's not perfect. No, China's not utopian, but looking at all the societies that exist on Earth, China is the most advanced, and they're the only society that's abolished poverty. They're the only society fighting imperialism. They're the main society engaging in this foreign policy and trade policy of mutual development and bringing countries together through BRICS. So compared to the U.S. imperialists, that's really good. Compared to what we have materially, you know, what China's doing with their society and with their state is really good. And to dismiss that all because it doesn't match up with my utopian anarchist idea of what a country should be, is silly. And like, imagine if China got rid of their government tomorrow, like hypothetically, you know how fast they would be taken over by the Western imperialists. You know how fast they would be taken over by the military. So Stalin expounds on this in his book, Anarchism versus Socialism. But like, the best way I can describe it is it truly is an ideology for children. Like, it's an ideology for, people who just have this dislike of any kind of authority and any kind of discipline, even, and many times even in their own lives. So
Yeah, hits the nail on the head. I'd also recommend Engels' short little piece that I think he wrote for either the Spanish or the Italian. I forget the Italian's chapter of the International, but it's called On Authority, which is just a couple pages, and it's really good. And it makes a distinction between genuine, necessary, helpful authority and like oppressive authority. But even beyond that, we should distinguish between like the oppression that allows the people's state to survive and the oppression that sustains an order that's premised on exploitation and oppression, and the enriching of a few on the backs of the many. So it treats all of these things in a very abstract form. It can't see the particular differences between capitalist dictatorship and socialist dictatorship, which in reality is leaps and bounds ahead of the capitalist democracy and their form of socialist democracy. It can't see the dialectic of dictatorship democracy, the dialectic of authority, and following, and all these different things. It approaches the world abstractly and through a purity fetish.
Yes. Yeah. Speaking of tweets, I was talking about tweets about anarchism earlier. There's one. I lost my train of thought. What did you say just now? Engels on authority. Yeah, there's one anarchist making some lame critique of on authority, and someone responds, with like Engels destroyed anarchism on his lunch break in 2 pages one day, and y'all still haven't gotten over it 100 years later. Which is true. On authority's so small, but it's so simple. Like, yeah, the state, there's always been a state in class society that wields authority. So if the working class, doesn't wield the authority of the state, how are they going to transition to a socialist society, a society dominated by the proletariat? It's impossible. It's a utopian thing to even think is possible. So that's anarchism. Eddie, have you ever considered mass producing replicas of your annotated books? I think it could help all those who struggle follow along with reading. I saw that people were saying that'd be fun and interesting. I always think in the back of my head, when I'm writing notes, like maybe someone will read these one day and find them interesting. But I also write a lot of dumb shit in the margins of the books. Like one time I gave my buddy my copy of Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. And at the part where Engels is engaging with this English philosopher named Bacon, I underlined Bacon and wrote yum. And it really threw my friend off because then he thought he was reading about a food instead of a philosopher. So I don't know if it would be as helpful as you guys think, to be honest. But it's a good idea because, like, my books are marked up. Like, look at here's this is just opening Red Star of the Third World to a random page. I marked the crap out of my books. So yeah, I don't know. Have you ever thought about that, Carlos? It would be interesting. Here's Marxism in the National Question. Every page is annotated like crazy. So maybe that would be a cool idea.
Yeah, and it's I can see why it would help people, because one of the main things I remember, the first book I ever read in Marxism was the German Ideology, and I highlighted every line to the point where there was maybe one small line that wouldn't be highlighted. And I was talking to my advisor because I was in the middle of a project, and I lent him my book, and he was going to look for a quote. He's like, "Dude, you have to highlight more discriminately." And I was like, no. The important part is actually the part that's not highlighted. And I made a joke out of it. But it was bad. And then as I've kept on like rereading the same book, you find yourself having to mark less and less and less. And that's a process of being able to distill, like, really, what's the essence here? Not, oh, cool, let me try to remember as much as possible, but what's the essence? So having someone who already did that for you and someone that you trust in doing that, I think would be cool. And I mean, today the times that I've read The Science of Logic, it's I've read it alongside Lenin's annotations on The Science of Logic, which has been for other reasons, not just knowing what's important and what's not, but having someone's notes on something is cool. I also put a lot of dumb stuff like burn and LOL.
I say LMAO so much. Or
Right.
suck it. I'll be like, suck it, Adam Smith. Suck it so much. And my Mao's Little Red book says Mao would disagree with modern Maoists about 700 times. But yeah, it's an interesting idea. So thank you, Female Rage, for the super chat, and we'll definitely consider publishing annotated books. I mean, it's a lot of writing that I've done, but I did the same thing. Like, if you looked at Capital Volume 1, the first time I read it, the notes I took are just stupid. I was like, there are points in where I wrote my second time through, like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, in response to my own notes that I read the first time. Like, you had no idea what Marx was talking about. But, and then, like you said, I highlighted more discriminately as I got into like Volume 2, because I realized, what's the essence of what he's saying here, and how is his argument unfolding, and where do you find the conclusions. But this is a good quote. Flourish within thy limits. I like that. Human flourishing, but you need discipline, and you need limits to get flourishing. Thank you so much, Ross.
Thank you.
Sugar daddy of Midwestern Marx. Ross also gave us like a freaking $100 for the iPad fund, so he's the goat.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ross. What are your thoughts on Lenin's thought on the use of the Iskra as a clandestine element to build organizational relationships across the country? I mean, really good. One of the things I've been saying a lot lately is It's good to read Lenin during the revolutionary period, but what you should also do is read Lenin during the Iskra period. Read Lenin when they were just doing political organization, agitation, and education. When it wasn't really necessarily a revolutionary moment, and they didn't know a revolution was sort of just around the corner. Because then you can learn, sort of what is to be done here in the U.S. Where we're in a pre-revolutionary period or whatever. Because that's the time to build up, educational elements and organizational elements. So yeah, that's what I'd say about that.
Yeah, I agree, man. And one of the things that we have done with the website specifically, it's called the Marks of Capital, is allow people to send in like their daily complaints about their employers and their landlords. And it's been a minute since we go back and do a stream reading those, but that was something that I believe it was the Iskra, or it might have been another one of the papers that did it, but it was a really good way of connecting with the people and letting the people see that the experiences that they have in their everyday life are not just individual, they're systemic. And that reinforces the understanding that if I want to remove this evil that's in my life, that's going to take a collective effort of removing the system that makes that same evil appear for my neighbors and for everyone else. There was also an interesting note, and Helena Sheehan gets at this in her Marxism and the Philosophy of Science, of the two papers that existed. The paper of the Bolsheviks, and which was primarily politically defined, and the paper of the Mensheviks. And one of the things that Lenin had to work out was the fact that sometimes he would be upholding dialectical materialism in like a non-eclectic position, and some of the other people in that paper were very eclectic and were letting neo-Kantianism and Marxism come into their Marxist world outlook, but they stood politically in the same side. So those contradictions of, okay, how are we going to run the paper? Because often, theoretically, Lenin aligned more with Pleganov, who was the head and Axelrod of the other paper. So those debates are interesting. If anyone wants to read a little bit more on it, I'd recommend Sheehan's book. She's got a couple really long chapters on the Russian Revolution and on the relationship and development of the sciences within the first few years of the Soviet Union.
Fascinating, honestly, and practical for the current period in the United States, and practical for what we're doing at Midwestern Marx, to be honest. Any good books relating to international and national unions within a socialist system? Asking as an IBB union member. Great question. There's a good book called Why You Should Be a Trade Unionist that we read as a part of a book club a while back with one of our buddies, who's a rail union guy. But isn't there a Lenin book about trade unionism, or a Stalin book about trade unionism? I haven't read as much about it as I should have, but I mean, in all of Lenin's works, he mentions the unions and how to work within the unions and, combat opportunism that arises within the unions. That's pretty much prevalent through all of his work, but I'm kind of drawing a blank on specific.
Yeah, because he's asking about within a socialist system. So there's a ton of it, like within capitalism, but within a socialist system, I haven't read much. I've read some about the Cuban mass organizations and their trade union organizations.
Oh, within a socialist system, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. It's an even more specific question.
Yeah, I haven't read much up on it, but again, one of these great questions that we can dedicate some days of research and come back and hopefully talk about it in a further stream. But
yeah, and also, I was going to say, and also a question that'll kind of be answered by, the future and future developments, seeing what unions do look like in socialist systems as they continue to come about and be built.
Right. Its character, I imagine, would have to change somewhat, and it does kind of change. It ends up being like um, just mass. In Cuba, at least, it functions as a mass organization that makes demands uh, politically in the interest of the working class. But it's also strange because it is a working class state as well. But just like the trade unions, there's women's organizations and youth organizations and different sorts of mass people's organs um, that are their relationship to each other is not political in the sense of how we think of the relationship between the Democrats and the Republicans, or between political parties in the West, where it's based on an antagonism. But it's a more complementary and mutually inclusive relationship that they have in focusing on specific sectors of society and how to advance the interests of those sectors in a way that's compatible with the rest of society.
Yeah. There's also the anarcho-syndicalist tradition. I'm not an anarcho-syndicalist by any means, but you could read that too. Basically they think, believe, I think, in like a decentralized sort of revolution that stems from the unions and the unions being connected. So there's probably valuable stuff, kernels of truth in that tradition. I haven't dug real deep into it, but isn't the IWW technically an anarcho-syndicalist organization? Isn't that what they call themselves?
No, he's asking for the IBB.
I know. I'm just saying, isn't that what
Yeah,
IWW?
yeah. The IWW is, I believe, they're explicitly anarchists. Um, the syndicalists at the turn of the century, especially in the U.S. and in other parts of the Western Hemisphere, the splits between like the Marxists and the anarchists weren't as profound. Um, and they did a lot of really good organizing work within the trade unions, and um, syndicalism itself wasn't that horrible of an idea, which was to have really these working class syndicates be the sort of mortar of political power and of the transition towards a new form of life. And um, that's a little bit captured in Lenin's statements that unions are the schoolhouse of communism. Like there's something in unions that forms or can be expressive of a different form of relationality than that which you find in other parts of capitalist society. It's workers explicitly coming together to advance at least their immediate interests. So, um, but yeah, those splits with anarchism are a product of like the post Russian Revolution world. Before that, the syndicalists and the anarchists weren't as horrible as they ended up being afterwards.
Absolutely. Imperialism always changes the game. Lends itself to opportunism. Thoughts on Howard Zinn? Americans know nothing about it, the American conquest of Mexico, Cuba, Philippines. It's embarrassing and eye-opening for my own learning. Yeah, I think he's great. I think A People's History of America is freaking awesome. One of my favorite things about it is the name too, because the name is almost Marxist in itself. Like he's not saying an unbiased history, because an unbiased history doesn't exist. He's saying it's a people's history. It's a history from the perspective of the toiling masses, which gives you a more correct view of history, a history that's not filled with lies, as much as like a bourgeois history, that paints their own conquest and their own, primitive accumulation or accumulation through exploitation through rose-tinted glasses, because it's beneficial for them. So really like A People's History of America and Howard Zinn's work. I think it's great for all American socialists to read and get an understanding of our real history, and get an understanding of how history is written by the victors, and the blatant lies, or if not lies, the selective facts or the selective history that's given to us oftentimes in the education system, in the bourgeois education system, in the factory education system, as it's sometimes called. So Yeah, love Howard Zinn. One of my buddies read that. It was like what really got him into socialism for the first time was A People's History of the United States or whatever it's called. So
And
same
his
buddy who I gave Utopian and Scientific to actually, who was confused by bacon.
he's dead now, but there's still a project called Sin Education that I think continues to do some good work. And he's got that famous quote, "You can never be neutral on a moving train," which is from a book. But yeah, People's History of the U.S. is an excellent book. It's in the tradition, I think, of Du Bois, although Du Bois is doing a lot more than what Zinn does in Black Reconstruction. He is, in a way, telling an alternative people's history of the Civil War and Reconstruction from the standpoint of specifically the Black proletariat and its relationship to the working class in general. But there's a book from Parenti, History as Mystery, and in the first chapter he goes over like these meta studies that have been done on U.S. history textbooks, and it found that either there was no mention of U.S. labor history, the abolitionist struggle, and just progressive struggles generally of our country's past, or when it was mentioned, it was always done under the light of like terrorism or disruption or whitewashed. Um, and that's why when the ruling class is doing something, you have to think and be like, why would they do that? It's because they want to disconnect the idea that the American people have of their nation and of their past. They want to disconnect it from any semblance of socialist, working class, progressive struggles. And we have to do the opposite of that. We have to connect the struggles today to the struggles of our brothers and sisters from the past who've been fighting for centuries for a better world, a world free of exploitation, imperialism, enslavement of any form, sexism, racism. And Howard Zinn's book is a really good milestone in a project of telling an alternative people's history, a counter history in the sort of language that Losordo uses. He tells a counter history of liberalism. What Zinn does is tell a counter history of U.S. history by focusing in on the progressive struggles.
It's a great way of putting it. This is freaking hilarious, dude. I'm taking you down, Liger says, shoot from Vision Quest. That's too funny. I used to call one of my buddies Shoot because he literally looked like him. But if you don't know, this is Shoot. And if you're Shoot, you might as well call me Loud and Swain and bring it on.
I think this is a big mistake, man. Why give yourself nightmares?
I already have nightmares.
It could be worse.
Hey, shoot!
Careful, man.
Shoot! Yeah? Do I know you? Loud and Swain, Thompson High. Think you'll make a wait? I don't know. I hope so. I hope so too.
Badass.
Bring it on, Shoot. That's hilarious. Thank you for making me laugh. Thank you, Red Hill, for the $1. Have you ever collaborated with Rathbone from TikTok? I went on his live stream once. That's the closest I've come, but he's pretty cool. Definitely could collaborate with him in the future. He's done like videos where he takes my debate with Vaush, or he takes other stuff that Midwestern Marxist posted and he riffs off of it and talks about it, which is cool. He's got like 60,000 posts on TikTok, or followers on TikTok. He's a machine, dude. He's like constantly posting TikTok videos and new skits like every day. So there's some theoretical disagreements like the other day had a video where he was like, why do we have all these people like Putin, a former KGB officer, as president? why can't we have more painters and artists? And I was like, that's like some anarchist shit. But either way, he's an awesome guy. He's an artist himself. He's a musician, so I'm just kind of giving him crap. But great creator. We could definitely collaborate in the future. Well, we finally made it to the end of our 31 super chats. Thank you so much, everybody who gave us a super chat. This was really, really fun Q&A session. I hope we did a good job answering your questions. We'll look into some of the questions that we weren't able to answer. But yeah, appreciate everybody who supports our project financially. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Supports our project financially. And we hope that we gave satisfactory answers to your questions. Yeah, you got anything else you want to say before we wrap up, Carlos?
No, thank you to everyone who watched and to all who were capable of donating. We have a book coming out sometime this week. It's titled The Outcome of Classical German Philosophy. It is a commentary from Dr. Riggins on Engels's explored but extremely important pamphlet, Ludwig Feuerbach and the Outcome of Classical German Philosophy, which I would also recommend as one of the go-to reads.
Yeah, Jason Aldean also was in on that, I believe.
Yes. So we have that coming out this week, and we just have so many incredible projects tied to the publishing press that it's getting to a point where we're stretching ourselves pretty thin, but I think that's a good sign. There's a lot of good work to be published, and we'll be doing a whole lot of that for the next few years, and hopefully for a very, very long time. So look out for that, and I'm sure as soon as it's out, we'll make quite a few posts promoting it. So
absolutely. Yeah, well, with that, guess I'll just say
we have one more.
Oh, we do? Oh,
yeah, Sam Dixon has entered. Hello, Sam. I'm late, but I am here. Engels is Ludwig Feuerbach. Yes, very important text. I think I prefer it to socialism and utopian and scientific just because it's pure philosophy. But it should be up there with socialism, utopian, and scientific. It's a wonderful, superb text. He writes it after Marx dies, I think in 1886, so 3 years after Marx's death. But
I'm just kidding about giving philosophy the thumbs down and the poop noise. I hope that wasn't offensive to you.
It was very offensive, and
Are
there will be
triggered?
repercussions. There will be repercussions. I'm a philosophy-centric. It's the mother of all disciplines, the mother of all sciences. And all the sciences that reject philosophy are the ungrateful children of philosophy. You can't have your political science degree without philosophy, mister. Where the root of all political science, sociology, all sciences are rooted in philosophy. So
you're so full of yourself, you philosophers. Just kidding. Yeah, thank you all. I want to say make sure to like and share the stream to help boost us against algorithmic suppression. Patreon.com/MidwesternMarks if you want to support us financially. If you do that, or if you become a YouTube member for above $10, you get a copy of Carlos's new book, The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism, the most important Marxist text written in the last few months or 10 years. Very good book. Seriously, it's awesome. Check it out. Very important. But yeah, my brain is fried at this point. This has been an amazing stream. See you all in class tomorrow. Yeah, you bet. Anything else to add, Carlos, before we head out? Should I play the Soviet anthem on my stream deck?
Oh, wow. I was just, yeah, I don't know. I'm ready to crack into a 16-hour discussion about Hegel's science of logic, but it doesn't seem like you're interested in that. So
I just don't know if I can keep up at this point.
Or
at all.
Yeah, should we put a song to sign out? Or,
Yeah, what do you got for us?
oh, I don't know. I don't have anything specific in mind. Maybe we can listen to some Paul Robeson. He's got a great rendition of Ode to Joy.
Ooh.
That'll be a good way to sign out, and that'll give me the pump up I need to go get a workout in now that we're done.
Heck yeah. I can't believe you're working out this late. You're crazy.
Yeah, and in a garage without air. So if you don't see me again, that might be the cause.
All right. Hopefully Paul Robeson doesn't sue us for copyright here. But solidarity, everybody. Thank you for hanging out. Appreciate it, and appreciate all the super chats as well. This is Paul Robeson's rendition of Ode to Joy to play us out.
The setting of the melody from the choral section of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony to the words by Schiller, all men are brothers, alle Menschen werden Brüder. Praise to Joy, the God descended, daughter of Elysium, ray of mirth and rapture blended, goddess, to thy shrine we come. By thy magic is united what stern custom parted white. All mankind are brothers plighted, where thy gentle wings abide. Freude, schöne Götterfunken, Tochter aus Elysium. Wir betreten feuertrunken, himmlische dein Heiligtum. Deine Zauber binden wieder, was die Mode streng geteilt. Alle Menschen werden Brüder, wo dein sanfter Fliegel weilt. Build the road of peace before us, build it wide and deep and long. Speed the slow and check the eager, help the weak and curb the strong. None shall push aside another, none shall let another fall. March beside me, oh my brothers, all for one and one for